He came out in the other room and seated himself by the fireplace and commenced reading it. His wife at that moment came into the room and exclaimed, "What, you're studying that thing again?" Or something like that. She then added, "I mean to burn that paper." He said, "No, indeed you will not. This will be a great thing someday." Whenever he was reading, he was completely occupied that he seemed entirely unconscious of anything passing around him. We'll later talk about another witness that identified Spalding with the manuscript, associated with the manuscript, while at Bainbridge. I won't cover all these details, but this is all hearsay testimony. Reverend John Winters, MD, claimed to have the Spalding actually showed him the manuscript. By the way, you'll see Spalding spelled both ways, with a U and without it. Without the U is the correct spelling, but people will still use the U incorrectly. They used it back then, they still use it today. Anyway, this is the daughter of Reverend John Winters in 1881. Again, this was many years later. She says, I frequently hear my father speak of Rigdon having Spalding's manuscript, and then he had gotten it from the printers to read it as a curiosity. As such, he showed it to my father. Again, this is hearsay evidence. It's not coming directly from John Winters, but from his daughter. And it came third hand from another Reverend Bonzall, and third hand from Reverend Robert Patterson Jr. He was, by the way, the son of Robert Patterson's printing office, who also happened to be a reverend. After Joseph Smith's martyrdom and the succession crises, Rigdon was rejected, as you know, as being a leader, and he was also excommunicated in the succession crisis. After that, he went to St. Louis. He had done business with James Jeffrey in St. Louis in the past, back when the Mormons were at Nauvoo. And James Jeffrey made this statement in 1884. He said that when Rigdon came through in 1884, Rigdon was on his way back to Pittsburgh when he left Nauvoo. Rigdon claimed that he was connected with the printing office in Ohio. I believe that was a mistake of memory. The Spalding's manuscript had been in the printing office for several years. The manuscript traced the origin of the Indian race from the lost tribes of Israel. Rigdon said he was familiar with the manuscript. Spalding had wanted to print it, but he had not the money to pay for the printing. And Rigdon and Smith used to look over the manuscript together. So these were all statements that James Jeffrey claimed that Rigdon admitted to him right after he was rejected. He's checking on the audio problems we're having. Another report that came out of St. Louis while he was there is Orson Hyde followed Rigdon down to kind of track his movements while he was in St. Louis. And he reported back to Brigham Young. He says, Rigdon claimed in St. Louis to be in possession of fact and power to have hurled Joseph Smith from the stage years ago. Later on in 1868, Rigdon claimed to know the contents of the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. If I recall, it was Joseph in Egypt and more about Zion. There are opposing views from Rigdon's descendants. His grandson, the son of Walter Sidney Rigdon, claimed Rigdon's role in the fabrication of the Book of Mormon was a tacit family secret. However, Rigdon's son, John Wycliffe Rigdon, claimed his father categorically denied any role in the fabrication of the Book of Mormon, as well as Rigdon's wife, John Wycliffe Rigdon's mother. Okay, the manuscript that was recovered by Hurlbut was believed destroyed in the Painesville Telegraph Fire of 1841, but it was recovered in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1884. And it was in possession of one of the owners, successor owners of the Painesville Telegraph, wrapped in brown paper, original brown paper. It was in a ledger-bound book that's 6 inches by 8 inches, and it was entitled in pencil, Manuscript Story, Conneaut Creek. It was turned over to Oberlin College, Ohio, where it now resides. At that time, namely 1884, the response by both the LDS and our LDS was that it was identified, they identified it as the manuscript found, manuscript story, which looks like a clever play on words to mislead the readers. It bears little resemblance to the Book of Mormon. The contents don't support witness statements. There are a lot of similarities to the Book of Mormon, but not the specifics that the Conneaut witnesses claimed. And the Mormon response is that this is the only manuscript written by Solomon Spalding. It's certainly the only extant manuscript that we have. And this is a photographic copy of it at Oberlin College. Just one sample. This, by the way, is reproduced at the courtesy of Art Vanek, who is one of the authors of Spalding Enigma. And I'd spoken to him when I was at the last ex-Mormon conference for quite a while. And he gave me a CD, or I bought a CD that included this picture. So let's compare the manuscripts. Based on, in the case of Manuscript Story, Conneaut Creek is based on what you can actually read today. In the case of Manuscript Found, it's just based on witness testimony. Okay, one is extant and one is not. The immigrants to America were Hebrew in Manuscript Found, but they were Roman in the extant Manuscript Story manuscript. Explanation of Indian origins. According to the witnesses, it did. This does not explain the origins of the American Indians. It was claimed to have Book of Mormon names and narratives, etc. This one does not. Manuscript Story does not. Frequent use of "it came to pass." Manuscript Story doesn't have that. Written in Old Style English. Manuscript Story is not written in Old Style English. Written on detached sheets of foolscap paper. Remember, that was Miller and McKee, who claimed it was the two witnesses that said it was written on foolscap paper, where this is a ledger-bound 8x6 book. Here's another important detail. All the witnesses, that is McKee, Reddick, and Mrs. Davison, claimed that the manuscript had been completed, was ready for publication, except for a title page and preface. Whereas this story ends abruptly amid a battle and is definitely not a complete manuscript. Trying to juggle too many things here. In summary of the Mormon, basically the Mormon response, first they point out that the Conneaut citizen statements are unreliable. It's all hearsay, which is true. Is prejudicial, which is true. Hurlbut had a vendetta to destroy Mormonism, which is true. Hurlbut led, prompted, coached, cajoled witnesses. That's just speculation. In fact, Von Brody in her book supports that argument. She doesn't support the Spalding Rigdon theory, nor did the Tanners, by the way. And she quoted, she said, the witnesses' consistency suggests judicial prompting. Later witnesses are unreliable, and there's a validity to some of this argument because things start to become conflated. You don't know how much you're influenced by what you read in the paper, etc. So it's a valid criticism. The witnesses' testimony are faulty, prejudiced, or conflated. Evidence is unreliable. It was all gathered by anti-Mormons, and you know we can't trust them. Solomon Spalding only wrote one manuscript. That's the position. That's the one that's at Oberlin College, Manuscript Story, Conneaut Creek.